Something I really wanted to present with because, well, then I could show you off a little bit of the IE10 that's coming down the pipe. Unfortunately, I've had a few problems with Windows 8. I think specifically it was my video driver that kept crashing. And I've installed a new one, but I did not want to take a chance. I just went ahead with a Windows 7 operating system, which means I'm limited to using IE9 for our presentation, as well as all the other browsers we'll be talking about. So, without further ado here, let's take a look at the content we're going to be covering here, folks. We're going to be talking about what HTML5 really is. Make sure we get our arms around it. You know, HTML5 is the biggest buzzword and shine in the pan that there is, the flash in the pan buzzword of the month. It seems every 6 months there's a new buzzword that's being thrown about. You know, we have to have service-oriented architecture and all this other stuff, right? And of course, HTML5 is a real important one, but it's because the browsers are finally starting to embrace some of the technologies. So the first part here, we will talk about what HTML5 really is, including the tags and the APIs, and truly understand HTML5. Well, that's what step 2 is about. We're going to talk about a little bit of brief history of how we got here. I mean, how did we get to HTML5 when HTML4 and XHTML were going along so fine? Step 3 here, we'll talk about tools for development. Again, those tools are going to be for Windows users, as well as I mentioned a tool used by Mac users, and I mentioned tools used by Java developers, as well as .NET developers. I wanted to make sure we keep it open, because that's the way my class is written. And if you come take the class here at Intertech, well, we have machines set up for you. We'll have all those different tools for you to choose from. Step 5 here, actually I missed step 4. We'll talk about the new content tags. I mean, there's over 30 brand new tags in HTML5, but we'll talk about the content tags and how they're used. Section 5 there is on the HTML5 shiv. We'll also talk about modernizer, and we'll talk about polyfills with graceful degradation. Step 6 is on Web Forms 2.0. Funny thing about Web Forms 2.0, even though we got it listed as Step 6, this is really the HTML5 background in its infancy. This is where it all started with Opera, the Opera team and HTML5 with their Web Forms 2.0. The last 2 pieces there, audio and video, we'll talk about how we can have our movies displayed and how we have to deal with these different browser vendors and insist on using only their codecs. I'll go through that. And then the final piece here, we'll talk about CSS3, some of the cool things that are there. We'll also talk about SVG and Canvas, reminding everybody that SVG is not part of HTML5. SVG has been around for a long time. Canvas, though, is purely HTML5. So we'll talk about it, and we'll look at some examples of drawing some graphics up on the screen. So what is HTML5? Well, HTML4 was the older standard that we had. HTML 4.01, to be exact, was a not case-sensitive, case insensitive, if you will, markup language. HTML5 adds more tags while being fully reverse compatible with earlier versions of HTML. And of course, the standards are controlled by the World Wide Web Consortium, oftentimes referred to as the W3C. These are the same folks that control the standards for the XML, XSL, XSD schema files. They also control standards for web services, and of course, HTML and all the other basic standards that we're used to working with. And the W3C, of course, was going down a different path when a different group decided to help define what HTML5 would be. And we'll get to that shortly here. Note that HTML5 is not officially recommended yet. It's too new. And it's a good thing, to be honest. I mean, it's great to start using it now and start playing with it and know what's coming down the pipe. But at the same time, a lot of the browsers don't fully support some of this stuff yet. And we'll talk about how we can overcome some of those shortcomings of the browsers. HTML5, besides being a bunch of new tags that we can use, is also a collection of new APIs that web browsers are expected to support natively. I'm talking web browsers, we usually call them user agents. That's how the W3C refers to them in their documentation. A user agent is not only a browser that you might be using on your desktop or laptop, but it might be the browser that's used on your tablet, your book, your e-reader, and also on your phones, your smartphones. Those are all user agents. Kind of a scary statistic that was announced. I heard it on NPR about 2-3 weeks ago. They said we've actually crossed the line over 50% where all the web traffic is being performed by non-humans. We've actually crossed over the 50% marker where we have spiders out there crawling around, and some of them are also evil scripts just looking for servers to hack as well. But apparently there's more robots surfing the web than there are humans now. A little frightening. So HTML5. HTML5 was created with fully the belief in that it would be reverse compatible with earlier versions of HTML, including the last version that was officially standardized, HTML 4.01. HTML5 includes 30 new tags, which I'll show you shortly here, and it includes new APIs that you should be able to call directly from your JavaScript. In some ways, it feels like some of the new technologies that are out there have been tossed into the HTML5 bucket, like SVG, for example, or some of the other new standards that the World Wide Web Consortium is considering. Because it's cutting edge and they want to add it to the web, they just say, yeah, that's HTML5 too. You know, there was a bunch of APIs out there that they were currently working on, such as WebSockets and geolocation, and they said, you know what, we'll just lump that into HTML5 as well, because it's got such an excellent branding right now. So be aware that HTML5 is really made up of a bunch of totally separate specifications that are out on the W3C site, and people have decided to go ahead and just lump them all into HTML5. But the heart of HTML5 is going to be those tags besides those APIs. Take a look at the history of this. It's amazing how fast standards were passed back in the old days. Like, for example, version 1, 2, and 3 were all passed in the same year. That's just a fantasy today. I mean, with HTML5, they said in 2012, they announced the initial release of what HTML5 specs should be. They don't expect it to be fully adopted until 2022 or something. And it's like 10-year difference. That's when they expect all the browsers to have full support for it. Well, here, HTML actually was standardized 3 times in 1 year. Also, these earlier editions of HTML, by the way, they did not make use of CSS at all. Cascading style sheets, in other words, which are used to stylize and position our content on the pages. So they would include all these extra tags, such as center, font, break, or bold. I mean, that's a B for bold. They would include all these extra tags that are just to stylize the page. Well, of course, when HTML4 was finally released back in 97, 2 years later, they said, hey, you know what, we have this thing called CSS now, so we should use that to style our page, and we should quit using those other tags. Imagine that. Center, font, and bold were recommended not to be used back in 97, and of course we still see them pop up occasionally on pages today.